Have you ever noticed how deafeningly silent life becomes just when you need support the most? It's when you strive, try, insist, and the world simply doesn't respond. No praise, no outstretched hand, no "I'm proud of you." And it's in this silence that many give up. But Carl Jung said that every time the world falls silent, it's because the soul is about to speak. Spirituality begins right there, when there's no longer a stage, no audience, and only presence remains. The problem is that we've been conditioned to confuse loneliness with failure. But what if it's the other way around? What if this emptiness is the prelude to something sacred, the birth of individuation, the moment you stop living to be seen and start living to be whole? Think about it. Maybe no one sees you now because this is the moment you need, for the first time, to truly see yourself. It's in silence that the self begins to whisper, revealing a strength that doesn't depend on validation. Self-sufficiency isn't isolation, it's emotional maturity. It's stopping begging for attention and starting to generate your own light. When you understand this, the noise of the world will no longer distract you. You'll begin to see that the path doesn't need to be lit by applause, but by the quiet flame that burns within you. So, if you feel like no one understands you, that no one recognizes how hard you're trying, don't run away from this emptiness. It's not punishing you, it's preparing you. Carl Jung called this the soul's rite of passage, the point at which the ego falls away so the self can be born. What seems like silence is actually an invitation, and if you have the courage to listen to it until the end, you'll discover that you don't need anyone by your side to follow, because what you seek outside has always been inside, waiting for the right moment to be remembered. He realizes that when the applause dies down, something different begins to vibrate inside, as if life were tuning out the external noise so he can finally hear his own frequency. This silence isn't empty, it's shelter. In it, spirituality ceases to be a concept and becomes ground. Like a mentor turning on a flashlight, he observes that the noise of others' expectations was masking the signals of the self. Now, in the calm, the right questions emerge. What truly moves me? Where is my presence lost? What in me demands individuation? And of course, the ego protests, but where's the like? But it's precisely in this pause that courage takes the first step. A practical exercise. For 7 days upon waking, do 5 minutes of box breathing, 4 to 4, 4 to 4, and then handwrite 3 sentences beginning with, "Today, I choose to honor." This simple routine creates emotional self-sufficiency. He sees himself before demanding to be seen. To tune the inner ear, 2 hands-on readings, Man and His Symbols, Carl Jung, to understand how the shadow speaks through images, and Atomic Habits, James Clear, to transform insights into small, lasting rituals. Ultimately, silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of meaning. And when he surrenders to this first pact, he realizes that haste has always been noise. The call doesn't shout, it whispers, and it whispers best when no one is looking. He discovers that his so-called lack of inspiration was actually an excess of distraction. Without the stage, the mask falls, and with it the need for performance. This is where spirituality ceases to be a theme and becomes a method. Observing without judging, feeling without dramatizing, acting without fanfare. A simple protocol for grounding presence. 1. Walking 20 minutes a day without headphones. 2. Practicing objective attention, mentally naming what you see, tree, light, wind. 3. Finally asking, what micro-truth visited me just now? It seems silly, but it's individuation in practice. He steps out of autopilot and becomes an author again. When anxiety comes with its favorite argument, if no one applauds, it doesn't count, he responds with facts. Recording in a silent progress journal, 3 minimal actions completed, an email sent, a page read, a workout completed. Pro tip for those who train self-sufficiency: set up an inner witness system. For each goal, a small reward, a specialty coffee, 10 pages of a novel, 15 minutes of sunlight. This isn't hedonism, it's friendly neurochemistry that favors constancy. And as the person treats themselves with respect, the shadow of self-sabotage fades. Funny how it works. The more they listen to themselves, the less they need to be heard. As the noise outside fades, he realizes that the noise inside also craves attention. The silence becomes a mirror. In the mirror, cracks appear. Old beliefs of "I'm not enough," promises made to exhaustion, agreements with guilt. Instead of running away, he makes a pact of radical presence. 15 minutes a day of sitting with what is, timer running, without correcting anything, just feeling. If he feels the urge to get up, he says, 2 more minutes, and stays. The magic? Little by little, what hurt stops controlling him. To support him, 2 practices of applied spirituality. Secular Lectio Divina, with a quote from Carl Jung each week. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens, and the 3 questions of integration method. What does this feeling protect? What does it ask for? What small step can I take today? If you want to bring the body into the conversation, 30-minute weight training, 3x week. Nothing mystical here. Muscle is a concrete argument against inertia. Note how this paves the way for self-sufficiency without arrogance. He learns to depend on himself without isolating himself from the world. On the horizon, a silhouette begins to emerge. The territory where solitude ceases to be a threat and becomes a master. And it's precisely when he accepts this door that the next room opens. Loneliness arrives quietly, almost always disguised as abandonment. But what few realize is that it is the most honest teacher of spirituality. When everything and everyone moves away, the scene becomes simple. Just you, the echo of your own mind, and what Carl Jung called the inner voice of the self. On this silent stage, without audience or applause, a rare kind of strength is born, one that doesn't need to be seen to exist. It begins to understand that solitude isn't isolation, it's purification. Social masks fall, external voices fall silent, and what remains is the raw sound of truth. And it is uncomfortable, but liberating. For those who want to experience this consciously, here's a practice. Set aside 1 day a month for a self-retreat. Turn off your phone, prepare a simple dinner, write 3 pages about how you feel. No filters, no emojis. At first, the emptiness seems devouring, then it transforms into home. It is the first glimpse of emotional self-sufficiency, the moment when a person realizes they don't need witnesses to be whole. Over time, silence ceases to be a punishment and becomes a laboratory. In the noise of interactions, the inflated ego screams, "Look at me," but in stillness, it finds itself dwarfed by the vastness of presence. The student who fears emptiness is the same one who has not yet learned to listen to his or her own heart. Jung said that modern man is lost not because of excessive noise, but because of a lack of solitude. The individual fragments into 1,000 roles, trying to be everything to everyone, and in the end, is nothing to himself. Therefore, when life tears him away from the crowds, it does not punish him, it prepares him. It is a stage of individuation, the crossing where the being separates itself from the crowd to reconnect with the self. A good practical exercise is to walk aimlessly, literally. Let the body choose its direction, observe the streets, listen to the rhythm of your breath. It is a living metaphor for the soul beginning to guide the body. And along the way, something changes. Restlessness becomes observation, lack, gratitude. Loneliness also reveals the shadow, that part of him that carries everything he avoided feeling. It's in the emptiness that it appears, asking for recognition, not punishment. When the silence drags on, old thoughts resurface. You're not enough. no one wants you. And that's where true strength is born. He decides not to fight these voices, but to sit with them, like someone having coffee with ghosts. An example? A man who, after a breakup, resists the temptation to fill the void with someone else. He cooks, reads, cries, and one day realizes the pain that seemed like the end was the beginning of a more honest spirituality. Silence became a friend. Presence became a balm. This phase teaches him that solitude is a school where the diploma is peace. And when he learns to walk alone without feeling lost, something within him matures. The call now demands more. It's no longer enough to endure the emptiness. It's time to cut the ties that keep him emotionally tied to the past. Sooner or later, the moment comes when he realizes it's not loneliness that hurts, it's dependence disguised as love. Carl Jung said that the ego clings to others to avoid facing its own emptiness. And that's exactly what happens when we seek externally what's missing within. The ego feels it needs the gaze of others to validate itself, a quick response to calm itself, a touch to believe it exists. But true spirituality begins when the individual decides to look within and say, I am enough. This isn't an act of pride, it's an act of presence, the choice to be whole with oneself, even when neediness screams. A simple exercise. When the urge to seek approval arises, stop, take a deep breath and ask yourself, what am I trying to avoid feeling? Writing the answer is already liberating. This is the beginning of emotional self-sufficiency, allowing self-love to replace the need for salvation. Because the truth is hard, but liberating. No one will come to heal you of what you refuse to face. He begins to realize how small things held him captive, the habit of posting and hoping for praise, the addiction to sharing his pain to see who stays, the habit of asking for advice not for wisdom, but for fear of making decisions. All of this is emotional dependence dressed up as tenderness, and Jung called it projection, placing on others the power we've abandoned within ourselves. The shadow of this dynamic is subtle. It makes the individual believe they need to be rescued, when in fact they need to mature. The good news is that the antidote lies in individuation. What does this mean in practice? It's learning to listen to yourself before asking the world to listen. For example, instead of rushing to the phone after a fight, you can sit, breathe, and ask, what in me was hurt? This pause changes everything, because where there is pause, there is awareness. And where there is awareness, there is choice. It is in this silent space that inner strength begins to blossom. Spirituality teaches him that dependence is not love, it's outsourcing one's own center. Love is being free enough to choose to remain. He realizes that the more he surrenders his emotional balance to another, the more fragile he becomes. So he begins to practice the opposite, self-sufficiency that doesn't repel love, but purifies it. A practical example, creating small rituals of care, cooking for himself with intention, buying flowers without reason, reading a good book, Clarissa Pinkola Estes' Women Who Run with the Wolves, for example, simply to nourish his spirit. These simple gestures reprogram the unconscious, showing it that it can be its own foundation. And the more he feeds on presence, the less he needs distractions. Emotional dependence loses strength when self-love gains density. And it's at this point that something changes. He no longer victimizes himself, but begins to realize that complaining is the language of the wounded ego. And when that language is silenced, life changes frequency. There's a moment when he catches himself repeating the same phrases. Nobody understands me. Life is unfair. I give everything and get nothing. And he realizes with a certain discomfort that these words sound all too familiar, not because they're true, but because they've become a refuge. The ego loves the feeling of being right in pain. Complaining is the way it found to stay in the same place without seeming cowardly. But Carl Jung explained that the unconscious only awakens when the individual takes full responsibility for their own experience. This is what he calls turning the mirror inward. In spirituality, this translates into a simple but revolutionary gesture, exchanging "why is this happening to me?" for "what is this trying to teach me?" The first holds him hostage, the second makes him an alchemist. A practical exercise. Every time a complaint arises, he should write the same phrase transformed into a question. For example, from "nobody listens to me" to "how can I communicate more clearly?" This inversion shifts the energetic field. Presence replaces powerlessness, and self-sufficiency begins to take silent root. Complaining is a way of escaping from oneself, and the curious thing is that the more one complains, the more the world seems to give one reasons to keep complaining. It's as if the universe is saying, "Want more evidence that you're a victim? Take this." The shadow feeds on these narratives. The more one claims to be weak, the more the unconscious creates scenarios to prove it's true. But when one decides to observe the pattern without judging it, something curious happens. Energy returns. The same energy one expended trying to blame someone now transforms into creative impulse. One understands that complaining is an unconscious request for power. And when one answers this request with presence, one discovers that the power has always been there, dormant. A good exercise is the minimal action journal. Every day, write down one thing, no matter how small, that one did instead of complaining. It could be a walk, an email sent, a conversation avoided. At the end of 21 days, the mind associates movement with power, and this is where the ego begins to lose its grip. When he abandons the language of victimhood, spirituality ceases to be theory and becomes daily practice. He discovers that freedom comes not from miracles, but from decisions. Small, repeated, silent decisions. Stopping complaining is like changing the fuel of one's destiny. It's not about denying the pain, it's still there, but about changing the role. From hostage to protagonist. Jung said, "I am what I choose to become." This phrase becomes an internal compass. Every time the mind tries to return to self-pity, he responds, "Today, I choose awareness." And this choice, when made daily, creates a new vibration. What was once powerlessness becomes individuation. What was once drama becomes direction. Little by little, he realizes he no longer needs to recount his pain to be seen. Silence now is his new language. But this silence brings another challenge: how to continue when no one recognizes him, when no applause confirms him. That's where the real test begins. There comes a point in the journey when the world seems silent. No one praises, no one recognizes, no one notices. The work is done, the effort is real, but the reward is silence, and it is in this emptiness that true growth occurs. Carl Jung said that accepting oneself completely is the most frightening act in life, because in this act, one stops waiting for the gaze of others to define one. Spirituality teaches that external applause is merely a reflection of one's own inner shadow, a part that still needs witnesses to believe in itself. When one decides to be one's own mirror, something powerful shifts. Instead of asking, "Am I doing well?" one asks, "Is this true to my essence?" This is the turning point, a practical exercise. At the end of the day, before going to sleep, write down 3 things you did that you are proud of. It doesn't matter if anyone saw them. This practice of self-affirmation reconnects the individual to presence, reminding them that true validation doesn't come from outside, but from a silent commitment to oneself. The silence that once felt like indifference now begins to feel like maturity. He understands that being ignored isn't punishment, it's a filter. Life removes the audience to test self-sufficiency. The ego, starved for applause, tries to sabotage. Nobody cares about you. But the soul, steadfast, responds, "I don't need to be remembered, I remember." And at this point he discovers what Jung called the regulatory center of the psyche, the self, the unshakable observer. From then on, value is no longer measured in likes, but in coherence. For a concrete example, artists who create anonymously, athletes who train without a camera, entrepreneurs who build in silence. They don't need to prove, just express. It is in this kind of presence that individuation is consolidated. The external mirror becomes dispensable because the internal one reflects clearly. And when he looks at himself and feels pride without needing an echo, it's a sign that something precious has been born, faith in himself. Being one's own mirror is, in essence, freeing oneself from the addiction to approval. Spirituality leads one to understand that true applause comes from a clear conscience. One begins to observe oneself with tenderness, acknowledging flaws, but also celebrating victories. A symbolic gesture to reinforce this. Every time you feel invisible, place your hand on your chest and say out loud, "I see myself." It seems simple, but it's a profound reprogramming. The mind learns that being seen for oneself is enough. Jung called this the inner witness, the part of us that observes without judgment. And when this witness awakens, it illuminates the shadow with compassion, not criticism. The mirror no longer deceives, it reveals. It is at this point that one begins to perceive the true purpose of one's falls. They were not punishments, but invitations to hone this inner strength. And as one understands this, something within one begins to shine, because every soul that truly sees itself must inevitably be tested by fire. Sooner or later, the ground gives way. No matter how much one meditates, studies, or plans, life always finds a way to test what one claims to have learned. And it is at this point that the theory of spirituality becomes practice. Carl Jung called this process necessary dissolution, the disintegration of the old self so that the new can be born. The ego sees the fall as a tragedy, the self as a laboratory. Pain is not punishment, it is alchemy. When everything collapses, what remains is the essential. It is in the fire of frustration, loss, and error that the individual realizes how much power they still projected onto others. The silence after the fall is different from the silence of meditation. It is the silence of reconstruction, heavy, dense, fertile. Anyone who has lost something important, a love, a job, a dream, knows. There is a moment when the air thickens and the soul falls silent. It is there that the shadow appears, not as an enemy, but as an instructor. And what does it teach? That real power is not in avoiding fire, but in passing through it whole. They learn that failure is not a verdict, but a mirror of everything that still needs to be integrated. The problem is never falling, but identifying with the fall. The immature spiritual person says, "God has abandoned me." The mature one responds, "God purifies me." And it is at this point that they understand the hidden beauty of pain. The flame that destroys also purifies. To apply this in everyday life, a symbolic practice, choose a significant mistake, write down everything it taught them, and then burn the paper. Not as magic, but as a ritual of integration. This physical gesture reinforces to the unconscious that the past has been absorbed, not forgotten. And little by little, the trauma transforms into wisdom. Modern neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited. Emotional pain, when embraced with presence, reorganizes brain circuits and strengthens resilience. Each failure accepted consciously becomes a layer of spiritual strength. This is how individuation manifests, not in perfection, but in honesty with one's own chaos. When he decides to rise, he does so not to prove anything to anyone, but to honor his own rebirth. The self awakens at the exact moment the ego surrenders. He discovers that self-sufficiency is not pride, but emotional maturity, the ability to walk even in fear, to start over even without guarantees. Each fall makes him more whole, more real, more humble. This is why the great spiritual masters, from Buddha to Jung, saw suffering as a portal. Spirituality is not about avoiding fires, but about learning to dance among the flames. The fire of falling is the final proof that the soul is ready to forge something new. And when the heat seems unbearable, it's a sign that the metal is almost molded. He breathes, rises, and walks, more conscious, more serene, more human. But there is something even deeper ahead, the realization that the heart does not always follow the purpose. And this is where the next lesson comes in, to act, even when feelings don't help. There are days when nothing inspires. The body feels heavy, the mind scattered, the heart feels no desire to move forward. And that's precisely when fate watches silently to see if he's learned to walk with his own lantern. Carl Jung said that man's true power lies in acting not because he wants to, but because he must. This is the moment when spirituality leaves theory and becomes discipline. The ego wants emotion, the self wants purpose. The difference is abysmal. When he begins to act without relying on the emotional tide, he discovers that silence can be fuel. There are days when the best spiritual training isn't meditating, but getting out of bed. Presence is built in those small, almost banal moments when no one is watching, and he does it anyway. A useful exercise. Write down 3 small daily actions that sustain the soul, even without feeling like it. It could be writing a page, preparing a healthy meal, taking a 10-minute walk. At the end of the week, review what you accomplished. This trains the invisible muscle of self-sufficiency, the will that cuts through discouragement. The ego confuses motivation with movement. But the wise man knows that inspiration is wind and will is direction. When he begins to act even without energy, he creates a rare kind of confidence, rational faith. Jung called this the transcendent function, the bridge between emotion and duty, the unconscious and consciousness. This is what happens when a human being acts in alignment with the self, even with a hesitant heart. A practical example: the writer who writes without inspiration, the athlete who trains without enthusiasm, the entrepreneur who works even without results. They are the ones who grow in silence because they understand that spirituality is continuity, not ecstasy. And the more they practice, the more they realize that emotion is fleeting, but purpose is permanent. When the mind tries to sabotage them with thoughts like, "I can't do it today," they respond with the calm of one who has been tested by fire. "I don't need to feel to move forward." And in that moment, the self smiles, because it knows that individuation is happening. Over time, acting without relying on mood becomes a form of prayer. He no longer needs to wait for motivation. He becomes the spark itself. The shadow of discouragement still looms, whispering, "Why persist?" But now he recognizes it and continues. This is the essence of spiritual maturity, staying the course even in the dark. He learns that willpower is the instrument that aligns the soul with time, transforming simple gestures into sacred rituals. If you want to apply this practically, you can create a persistence ritual. Choose a time of day and accomplish something small at the same time each day. Repetition creates constancy, and constancy instills self-respect. It is at this point that presence matures, not as euphoria, but as serenity. He no longer needs external motivation. He has become the engine itself. And it is when body and mind finally align with willpower that the next lesson begins to unfold. The one born when the whole world falls silent, and he discovers that silence is the mirror of the self. There comes a point where the noise disappears, not for lack of sound, but because the individual has learned to listen differently. It is the moment when silence ceases to be discomfort and becomes a mirror. Carl Jung said that he who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens, and that is exactly what happens here. The individual sees himself clearly for the first time. The world no longer needs to understand him, because he finally understands himself. Spirituality matures. It no longer seeks mystical experiences or extraordinary signs, only the simplicity of being present in what is. He realizes that the self speaks softly, and that the ego, with its noise, has always hindered this listening. Now he sits with himself, not to control his thoughts, but to observe them like clouds. A practical exercise. Sit in silence for 15 minutes, observing the air entering and leaving his nostrils without changing anything. When the mind speaks, he smiles and thinks, this is part of it too. This is how presence deepens, when he stops fighting what he feels and starts listening to what the feeling wants to say. In this silence, the shadow reveals itself in a curious way. No longer as a monster, but as part of the landscape. He begins to see that everything he rejected, anger, fear, guilt, also composes him. Acceptance replaces judgment, and the heart expands. Jung called this integration, the most delicate stage of individuation, when light and darkness cease to compete. He understands that there is nothing to eliminate, only to include. An example, the professional who always hated his impatience and now realizes that when refined, it is merely passion without direction, or the woman who saw her sensitivity as weakness and now understands that it is sensitivity that gives her depth. Spirituality becomes psychological practice, and psychology becomes spiritual practice. The being no longer needs to prove itself, it simply is. And curiously, it is at this point of stillness that life begins to flow again. Without noise, without effort, without fear. Silence also teaches self-sufficiency in a way no theory can. He realizes that true support comes not from outside, but from his own serenity. This is when it becomes his own home, and the noise of the world, which once shook him, now feels distant. He lives in the same chaos as before, but the chaos no longer lives within him. Presence becomes a stable field, and external noises lose their power. To apply this to his daily routine, he can create small intervals of conscious pause before sending a message, before responding to a problem, before reacting. 3 seconds of silence are enough to transform the tone of his soul. This micro-practice reconfigures the unconscious, reinforcing the maturity he has achieved. And it is in this tranquility that he realizes silence is not the end of the journey. It is the abode of the self. But there is something beyond. A light that demands no applause, a state in which the soul becomes so whole that it no longer needs to be seen. It's time to return to center and discover that true brilliance makes no noise. After going through fire, cold, and silence, he returns. But he's not the same as he left. There's something in his gaze that betrays he's seen what few have the courage to face, the depths of himself. Carl Jung said that the man who descends into inner darkness returns with light in his hands. This is how spirituality culminates, not in ecstasy, but in serenity. The self establishes itself as an internal sun, discreet, constant. He no longer needs to prove anything, nor justify what he feels. Presence has become his home, and the world his mirror. Now, external noise no longer seduces him, and praise no longer intoxicates him. He moves with ease because he understands that value lies not in recognition, but in coherence. A practical exercise to cultivate this state. At the end of each day, instead of listing tasks completed, write down moments of truth, small moments in which you acted according to your soul. Perhaps you said no with love. breathed before reacting, or simply listened to someone with full attention. That's where the silent light comes on. The curious thing is that by stopping trying to be seen, he becomes more visible. People notice something different. It's not charisma, it's integrity. It's mature self-sufficiency, the kind that doesn't repel love, but doesn't beg for it either. Spirituality is now an invisible practice, being present in everything, even the most mundane tasks. Cooking, working, driving, everything becomes meditation in motion. He understood what Jung called the individualized man, one who acts freely because he is reconciled with his shadow. There's no longer a struggle between what is and what should be. There is only the natural flow of what is. A good symbolic exercise. Look at yourself in the mirror for a minute in silence, without correcting anything, without judging the reflection. Just observe. It's uncomfortable at first, but liberating over time. Gradually, he understands. The face staring back doesn't seek approval, it seeks presence. And when the gaze becomes soft, it's a sign that the self has taken the helm. The return to the center is the point where the journey ends and begins again. He realizes that solitude was not a punishment but an initiation. Silence was not absence, it was language. The shadow was not an enemy, it was a map. Everything he sought, love, peace, meaning, was always there, just waiting to be seen without haste. Now he walks lightly, without the urgency to conquer, without the guilt of resting. Life continues as it is, but not him, because his inner world has shifted gravity. He is his own axis, and he spins in peace. Spirituality did not distance him from reality. It immersed him in it, more lucidly, more humanly, more fully. And when he looks back, he understands. All the effort to grow when no one applauded him was not vanity, it was gestation. He became what he always sought, a light that does not need to be seen to illuminate, but there is a subtle detail. Every true light, when it is born, awakens another, and that's when the cycle begins again. The call that once came from without now whispers from within, inviting you to share what you've learned. Now that you've made it this far, I need to ask you a direct question. How many times have you stopped just because no one was watching you? How many dreams were kept hidden for fear of appearing too small? Carl Jung believed that true awakening doesn't happen in the temple, but in everyday life, in that moment when you choose to continue, even when tired, even when alone. This is what spirituality is, transforming solitude into an ally, silence into fuel, and emptiness into fertile soil. Individuation isn't a miracle, it's a decision to become whole without needing witnesses. So, before closing this video, take a breath. Ask yourself, what inside me is waiting for my own validation? What can I start today, even without enthusiasm, even without applause? Because what moves you is not the strength of others, it's your presence. And believe me, when you learn to walk alone, the entire universe begins to walk with you. If something in you has awakened, if some part has remembered who it is, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every week, we talk about what really matters. This silent journey of coming to oneself, of becoming light even when no one is looking.